Marc Mazza was a bit player in European films. Acted in bit parts. Bit parts. If you go looking for official film stills from the movies he appeared in, good luck finding photos of Marc in them. And if you do, he's often the guy at the edge of frame. Or he only has a body part that made it into the shot. Hell, this Italian movie poster thought it was perfectly fine to cut half his face off. I mean, who needs to see Marc Mazza to sell your film anyway, I guess? And yet somehow this little-known, bald 1960s and 1970s actor ended up being featured on James Bond merchandise and was an influence to some of Jim Morrison's final songwriting. I'm tough guy film expert Mike Malloy, and I have an excuse. See, Marc Mazza probably only stuck in my head in a strong way because he vaguely resembled one of my father's friends growing up. How anyone else would notice him, at least to the point of remembering his name, well, that's a bit of a mystery to me. Now, Marc was not an extra, mind you. He did speaking parts. But in The Phantom of Liberty, for instance, he has one line and a whopping 13 seconds on screen. But again, Marc's minor acting career reached farther and wider into pop culture than you might expect. So, how did this bit player make such a surprising impact given his scant screen time? And what was his rave business success in a totally unrelated industry? Well, how about we look, possibly as the first ever to do so, outside of his family and friends, at the acting career of one Marc Mazza. With a French spelling of his first name and an Italian or at least Italian-sounding last name, and with Marc acting in plenty of French-Italian co-productions, it's easy to wonder where this guy came from. But Mazza was born in Paris and was French, but as with many of the international co-productions of the day, there were hiring quotas from the different countries. When Marc got his start in the mid-1960s, one of the prevailing film fads in the then very fad-oriented European film industry were the low-budget spy films, the cash-ins of the hugely successful James Bond movies. Marc appeared in one of the OSS 117 movies that came in the wake of Dr. No. This would prove to be a very ironic start for Marc Mazza, considering the full circle to which he would eventually bring his career. But more on that later. Another key early role came in the 1964 film Joy House, starring American actress Jane Fonda and French star Alain Delon. It was directed by a Frenchman named René Clément, who is sometimes considered the French Hitchcock. Mazza plays a villain, one of a group of gangsters. Clément, like any smart director, worked again with cast members he got good results with. Joy House, for instance, starred leading man Alain Delon from one of Clément's previous films, Purple Noon, which incidentally was the first movie featuring the Tom Ripley literary character. So when René Clément was directing 1970s Rider on the Rain, who should show up as the character who sets everything in motion? Why, his old Joy House actor, Marc Mazza. Now, whether you use the English language title, Rider on the Rain, or the original title, Passager de la Pluie, this Charles Bronson suspense film has a title character. And that critical title character is not played by Charles Bronson, it's played by Marc Mazza. He's the guy who rides in on the rain. And when you remember that the Doors wrote their hit Riders on the Storm after Jim Morrison watched this film, it's fair to say that this little-known character actor was at least an indirect influence on a very famous, moody, atmospheric hit song. Mazza's a menacing character in Rider on the Rain, and his disturbing performance, whether in a stocking mask or not, reminds us why he usually got cast as a villain. His bald head and interesting features, which includes a Kirk Douglas chin, were what made him identifiable. I think his appearance really helped him stand out from other bit players, the bald dome especially. So it was always a little curious when they occasionally covered him up with a hat or a wig. He feels like such an important part of Rider on the Rain that when watching his death scene early in the movie, a friend of mine, a friend more used to conventional cinema, just kept saying to himself, "Well, he's not dead. There's no way. He's not dead," while he and I watched it. I think he expected Marc to play an almost supernatural slasher throughout the film. But no, except for a few scenes where he plays a stiffening corpse, Mark's Rain Rider is out of the movie. And the film went on to be a huge success. It broke attendance records in France and made Bronson the biggest star in Europe. And the next year it won a Golden Globe in the United States. And did Mark get rewarded for his pivotal role as the title character of Rider on the Rain? Did it lead to any juicy parts for him? Why, yes indeed. The spaghetti western fad may have been winding down, but Mazza was cast as one of 3 villainous brothers in The Grand Duel, which starred genre stalwart Lee Van Cleef. Now 2 of the brothers are merely using their father's unsolved murder to seize power and scapegoat their opponents. Mazza, however, plays a conflicted character. He's the brother who wants to get to the truth rather than accept the answers he's being fed. It's not a bit part, it's a full-on supporting role. And what's more, it's a complex character, and Mazza's great in it. This really could have been Mark's ticket to a reputation as a powerful character actor. But sadly, as I indicated, the spaghetti western as a genre was winding down in the 1970s. It was in its final phase, the phase that lampooned the serious westerns that came before. So the dead serious Grand Duel had a shoestring budget. They couldn't even afford holsters for all the characters, and westerns like it were taking a backseat to buffoonish western parodies. So of Marc Mazza's 2 big Italian western roles in the 1970s, few people saw The Grand Duel, and a much wider audience caught him in a ridiculous part for My Name is Nobody, starring Trinity actor Terence Hill. It's an embarrassing scene for Mark as he gets slapped around and ridiculed during a gun duel. This humiliating scene is only made worse by the fact that their slap duel is really just a thin reworking of an earlier scene from the second Trinity film. In the 60s, there was one surefire way for a European actor to be seen in every last corner of the globe, including America, and that was to be in a James Bond film. But Mazza had only managed to be in his cheap Bond knockoff. But in the 1970s, there was beginning to be another way. Both Hollywood and the Europeans were becoming very interested in crime films, and occasionally the 2 industries would cross-pollinate. American actors would turn up in Eurocrime films, and European actors would turn up in Hollywood crime films. French actor Marcel Bozzoufi, for instance, reached American shores by co-starring in the Roy Scheider Hollywood film The French Connection. So when Roy Scheider came over to France to star in The French Conspiracy, maybe Marc Mazza could get in on that one. And maybe the film would blow up as another international blockbuster. Well, the former did happen. Mark made it into the very impressive international cast, but the latter did not. The French Conspiracy failed to make any sort of splash. So Mark just dove into acting in small parts in more European crime films. But remember that ticket to international exposure from the 60s? Turns out it was still valid in the 70s, and there was a revolving door between the Eurocrime films and the Bond films. A lot of Bond girls also did Eurocrime movies. And the great stunt coordinator Remy Julien from James Bond films like For Your Eyes Only and Octopussy, he had gotten his start in the low-budget realm of Eurocrime. And it finally happened for our man too. Mark got cast in a small uncredited part as a lab technician in Moonraker. In fact, your humble narrator is the person who spotted him and added the credit to IMDb. It might be tempting to think that he got the part because of his connection to the film's main Bond villain, Drax, played by Michael Lonsdale. See, Mark and Michael both appeared in The Phantom of Liberty earlier. And by the way, for weird James Bond fetishists who have always wanted to see a Bond villain's bare ass, well, that's your film. But no, Mark said in a guest newspaper editorial that he got the role just by going to see a casting director. And he said he shot his death scene in a single take. Well, that's ironic, considering that he had multiple takes to die suitably for his low-budget OSS 117 film. So he played the part in Moonraker. Now what? Was it going to lead to any actual exposure, or would he just end up the guy in the background of film stills again? No, this time was different. Mark's character not only got featured in his very own film stills, but he appeared on and in James Bond merchandise too. A bit player had arrived. In any case, the actor who had been killed by a cut-rate James Bond clone at the very beginning of his career had now been killed by the genuine article. Marc Mazza had come full circle. Marc continued acting beyond Moonraker, but less and less frequently. It's possible he was devoting more time to his parallel, unrelated job as president of a cosmetics company, APOA. Yes, believe it or not, Marc and his wife founded this company, which introduced Tahitian cosmetic products to France in the 1970s. He continued as the head of the company until 2003, and his daughter, Gay, seems to have remained heavily involved at the time of this video. And there seem to have been other business pursuits from the very beginning. If you search Marc Mazza on Getty Images, you'll find 1962 photos of him posing with the body of a sports car about to be debuted at an auto show. Was he an investor in the car? Did he help design it? I have no idea. But one thing's for sure. Marc Mazza seems to have had a life rich with accomplishment. Wherever he is right now, I hope he feels that way too.